This speech is called Performative Strategies of Resistance, and I'll try to outline the artistic utopia I have been chasing for the past 2 years of my studies at HMDK. In order to do so in the most precise way, I'll have to take 2 perspectives, which have become undividable for me in my practice: theoretical observations and practical experimentation. Peculiarly, my discursive reflection is mostly dedicated to the mediality of music, whereas my compositional work is focused on overcoming the musical conventions and exploring problematics beyond the medium of their expression. I find this duality of self-positioning essential for what I'm aiming for, and therefore it determines the structure of my ongoing speech. It will roughly consist of 2 separate parts and an epilogue. Firstly, I would speak about abstract category of performativity and my attempts of defining it. Then I would switch to describing the process of developing methods and making decisions for my most present and still ongoing project, Private Spaces. In the epilogue, the first part would be used as a calque to find new meanings in the second. Enjoy. Why is performativity important? To answer this question, I'd have to give a wider context of my aesthetical interrogations. The political climate of the recent years has reached a turning point, after which it seems impossible to proceed with artistic escapism. In other words, it appears to be careless, ignorant, and even outright irrelevant to keep one's work in a bubble, independent from the events of the outside world. The strategy of self-contained preservation is inevitably doomed to fail, at least because the outside world is already inside of our private lives. Michel Foucault brought by the concept of microphysics of power, which is extremely significant for my compositional practice. It reveals how even the most intimate aspects of our lives are pervaded with impersonal structures of control. Not least because of a personal politically related crisis, I started questioning the definition and the role of actions, or the condition of infertility of actions in the social context. Already developed and acknowledged theories of performativity give a wide territory for further investigations in this direction. I see studies of performativity as studies of actions which resist. It may not be possible to change the existing order of things, but I want to insist that it's at least possible to put up resistance. Let's see which instruments does performativity offer us in this regard. I will outline my definition of performativity in 4 modalities of its functioning. The first one is medial conditionality. Performativity is not restricted to a specific selection of mediums. Instead, it can occur in any medial condition, from human body to piece of paper to composition. Medium is understood here as an assemblage of material restrictions and culturally connoted practices embodied with or through those material restrictions. It is necessary to state that performativity, in my terms, has nothing in common with practices of performance. Each actualization of performativity's work is deeply dependent on the conditions and setting provided by the medium. Performativity is therefore never identical to itself and needs constant reacquiring. Performativity realizes itself on the body or from the body of a medium, instead of being an object of its representation. The focus doesn't lie on what is shown, but on what allows it to be shown. Guy Debord states that spectacle, as a tendency, forces to look at the world with the help of various special indirections. One could add that the spectacle purposefully conceals existence of such indirections. One of the strategies of resistance could thus be targeted amplifications of the indirections and their artificiality. The second quality is dependence on material specificity and simultaneous separation from matter. On one hand, performativity seems to be inseparable from materiality of a concrete body which it's inhabiting. On the other, it doesn't subordinate to the common patterns of inhabited bodies' behavior, undermining the status quo of bodies' omnipresent distribution. Body is understood here as a material representation which is produced and constituted by a particular virtual system of power relations. During the intervention of the performative, material representation suddenly acts from unknown relational structures. The representational object is maintained, whereas the rules of its interrelations have changed. It is to be concluded that at first glance, performativity seems to be fully merged with concrete matter, but it doesn't follow the gravitation of its standardized logics. It is involved in production of its own separation, which is embodied in a certain shift or a series of shifts. The third quality is denoting culturally contaminated formulas, patterns, and unities. Where performativity is realized, subjective intentions are found anew in the body of contexts which are normally engaged in annihilation of such intentions through attempted structural determination of social order. If Deborian spectacle is life that was moved into representation, then act of performativity is vesting this representation a second level of life from the inside of its zombie existence. In other words, it's a return of vitality from within the negation of life. All in all, performativity is an attempt of action from the impossibility of action as such. And finally, the fourth modality of performativity's functioning is direct adversation to witnesses. The material shift, described above, produces an effect which triggers a conflict in perception. It doesn't allow witnesses to take a comfortable position of spectating due to its physical aftermath. Directress Julia Ducournau calls such phenomenon body empathy. Performativity makes explicitly tangible the nexus between intimacy of being and impersonal social structures. With this statement, I close the first theoretical part of my speech and proceed with the practical one. Before describing in detail the methods I've developed and the decisions I've taken, I'd like to say a few words about the status of this project. It's called Private Spaces, and I've been working on it since June 2023, and it is still a work in progress. However, the first version has been finished, as well as performed by Ensemble Modern this February. I will further talk not only about what is fixated in the score, but also about what is still planned to be finalized. It's important because I like to show a horizon of my thinking and concentrate on movement instead of things I've already achieved. I'll try to primarily share my process of thinking while creating. So the starting point for this piece was my fascination with horrors in widely distributed culture, niche cinematography and mangas, as well as theoretical reflections on the nature of uncanniness and fright. Horrors appeal to me as they have the power to amplify symptoms of our society through revealing and operating collective fears. I was intrigued by the problematics behind Junji Ito's Town Without Streets. Basically, the plot can be summarized as follows. Due to a chain of events, the wall of all houses and all apartments cease existing. It is now possible to observe everything that each person is doing at all times. This event causes ecstatic excitement together with unprecedented violence and sexual euphoria. To summarize, erased borders between private and public life segmentation is taken as the kern of uncanniness and becomes a catalyst for further catastrophic social tremors. It's significant to state that a reference to Junji Ito is not an underlying concept behind the piece, but a stimuli or a trigger for selecting a direction of further search. It's not essential for understanding the final piece, but it is meaningful as a glimpse into my creating process. So the next question which arose was, how is it possible to exhibit the uncanny entanglement of privacy and publicity by compositional means? After considering multiple options, I came to a solution. What if I asked musicians to record their own private spaces? I sent the musicians the following instructions for making this recording, which you can now see on the screen. I will accentuate only 3 points from them. At a certain point, it became clear that it's necessary to restrain the number of recording possibilities to just one functional space, as the tapes had to contain not only differences, but also similarities and repetitions. I had to choose one particular room in the apartment. So why kitchen/living room? First of all, as I played with thematic of uncanniness, kitchen seemed like the most appropriate choice because of the number of objects associated with violence, like knives, cooking tools, washing machines, refrigerator, and so on. Second of all, while limiting the number of activities, it still has a big assortment, combining recreational zone, cooking zone, transitional zone, among other possibilities. Last but not least, it takes a special place in the apartment between privacy and commonality, as a lot of members of family can stay there simultaneously. Two further important criteria which I asked the musicians. They were not allowed to perform in any special or staged actions. So as far as it goes, it had to be authentic activities similar to the routine patterns. And the second restriction was that no music was allowed inside the apartment during the recording, for reasons that I will explain further. As a result, I received 8 field recordings. To my surprise, the level of openness and authenticity on them was quite high. People were laughing, talking, coughing, walking on high heels, cooking, brushing their teeth, and so on, as if no recording took place. The uncomfortable feeling of peeking, of eavesdropping on someone, accompanied me the whole way through. It was an extremely awkward sensation. We can now listen to 3 short examples so you can get the idea what kind of tapes I got. So, to conclude, the first layer of entanglement between privacy and publicity is dedicated to exposure, as the privacy of musicians is revealed to the witnesses, to the public. What is supposed to be private now became public. 2 further significant motives, which will be developed later, can already be traced at this point. The topic of voyeurism and of surveillance. So the next occurred question was a pragmatic one. What could musicians play on top of the field recordings? Or what would make sense to be juxtaposed to the exposure of privacy? Since the intimate component was there, following my initial idea, it was necessary to find something from public sphere. I finally settled my choice on background music from public spaces. Shopping malls, restaurants, airports, gas stations, etc. I call the techniques of influence used in this type of music sonic biopolitics. Initially, the term biopolitics was introduced by Michel Foucault. In my interpretation, it signifies the power which stimulates biological instincts and behavioral patterns by the means of musical parameters such as tempo, timbre, harmony changes, and so on, in order to control, to direct, and to guide human bodies. Let's have a look on how it works inside the background music. At different parts of my piece, the instrumental part mimics chill out, ambience, march, Hans Zimmer, classical Muzak, Eric Satie, and Brian Eno. In order to become these genres, at first I had to analyze how are they made. I won't go into detail about all of the mentioned above, as it will take too much time, but I will show my analysis on one example. So, this is the chill-out music, which can be characterized by various qualities. Firstly, the speed control. The tempo needs to be clear so that people can walk in a stable tempo, which is easy to follow. Then it needs to have a certain relaxation effect, which is achieved, for example, by catchy and distinguishable hooks. There are almost no surprises in this music, as it consists of endless repetitions of the same patterns. It needs to have a good improvement on the mood, and doesn't need to take too much attention, so the lack of memorizable events is very important. However, the main principle of its production is layering a big amount of short loops on top of each other in various combinations. So what I did in my piece was writing a lot of samples, so 7 of them, which can be heard during the first part of my piece in various combinations. For example, sample 1 endlessly repeats then with sample 2 on top of them, or sample 3 is combined with sample 5, and sometimes they're combined all together. The pattern of 2 or 4 bar repetitions never changes, whereas the layering of different combinations change time to time. We can have a listen how it sounds all together, although this is not a recording of the piece, it's just a simulation made from logic. But it was not enough to simply reproduce such music in order to establish control over the recorded behavior on the field recordings. I had to connect it to the actions which are happening on the recordings, so that the bond between 2 layers of intimacy and publicity would become unbreakable. So, how is control manifested in the piece? In the first part, there are a lot of places where the background music resembles the tempo of footsteps on the recording. For example, you can see it here. The line above indicates footsteps, and the conductor needs to follow what he or she hears in the click track, in the field recording, and thus conduct and guide all musicians in such tempo. We can hear this short place. It's again not a recording from the piece because I don't have it unfortunately yet, but just the tape. Another example is a rhythm of march in part 3, which fully merges with the rhythm of actions on the recording. Again, we can hear. So the whole rhythmical structure of march is fully connected to the actions happening on the recording. In addition, the genres of all background musics are connected to the activities on the field recordings. For example, in the second part of my piece, ambience for deep concentration is juxtaposed to cutting vegetables. And particular tempos or events can begin well in advance and precede the consequences on the tape. Due to that, background music starts to gain an agency of its own, becoming an active actor of the events. We need to note this thought, as I will expand it later. So, the second layer of the entanglement between the private and the public is dedicated to a spectralization of reality. Music is constructed as an intruder inside the private lives of humans. Taken from public spaces and aimed to control, it supervises life inside the private apartments. Spectacularization of reality happens in movies through soundtrack, but also humans, influenced by pop culture, put soundtrack from movies in their daily routine to make it more colorful and bearable and to feel like movie stars. Both of these 2 layers are represented in my piece. And so from then on, the task of the piece was to compose a supervising soundtrack for apartments. The next task consisted of finding a solution to the following problems. How to change the role of witnesses from passive spectators to active participants, and how to make background music sound inside of the field recordings. My father's decision determined the development of the whole piece. It was established that no musicians should be in the same room as listeners. Their playing can either be transmitted in real time from an adjacent space or be pre-recorded. This leaves witnesses spread all around the space, together with a variety of loudspeakers. So this way, the witnesses are placed in different parts of the room, so they're in the middle of events, thus becoming a part of them. Since the spaces in the field recordings are merging with an actual space of the concert, humans become part of the sounding events. B. Witnesses can be placed on pillows, looking at different directions. Their attention is not concentrated on one point, like stage and musician. Instead, it's distributed all around. And finally, the background music can sound from the inside of the field recordings. This setting provides more chances for curiosity to the events occurring outside as well as inside the witnesses. So the third layer of entanglement is dedicated to the private spaces of listeners. It can be of extreme discomfort to listen to background music and contemporary composition surrounding, as it was banned from the scene for a very long time. Simultaneously, it was my purpose to select such references that usually force myself to go faster when I hear them in public surroundings, as it's impossible for me to bear. Something about this music is inherently disturbing. Perhaps the hidden guilt of following its orders, and at the same time a clear incapability of not doing so. The chosen setting allows witnesses to concentrate on themselves and their reactions. They are welcome to look at each other and therefore experience the shared discomfort. Following the arguments described above, the reactions to the music in the piece becomes a part of the piece. The chosen situation of composition's perception opens a door into a previously unexplored territory. The absence of musicians causes uncertainty that changes the rules of the game. To start with experiencing this problematics, I propose to watch a short excerpt from David Lynch movie Mulholland Drive.
No, I banda. There is no band. Il n'est pas d'orchestre. Song and tape recording. No, I banda, and yet we hear a band. If we want to hear a clarinet, listen. Un trombone à coulisse. Un trombone en sordina. J'aime les sons du trombone en sordine. Quel son? A muted trumpet. It's all recorded.
The main topic of this scene, as well as most of Lynch's work, is the nature of illusiveness. What is a work of art other than an illusion that plays with perception of its recipients? Any artwork is artificially constructed, but a lot of them are trying to conceal that fact. A self-referential work, in contrary, denounces the mediality that allows an illusion to be preserved. A work in this case becomes a full-fledged actor which begins to dictate the subsequent events from within of its artificiality. Let's take a closer look at the phenomenon of ontological uncertainty integral to the piece. To what extent is the field recording an authentic documentation if one records themselves in awareness that there is a recording going on? Are the field recordings performed live in another space, pre-recorded, or imitated by instruments? For instance, in part 1, the percussionist is asked to find sounds similar to the excerpts from the field recordings 8. For instance, we can now hear how it sounds in the field recording. So here the appropriated sounds from the field recording are recomposed and transferred to the level of background music. Another example is part 2, where bass flute and horn are imitating the washing machine a few parts before it occurs on the field recording. Moreover, there are 2 field recordings with sounds of washing machine on them. In the first one, there are cutting sounds on top of it, and during the second recording, one of the musicians is asked to perform the cutting live from another space. In the anchor of the piece, the ambience of the space adjacent to the main hall is amplified, and musicians are asked to reincarnate the actions they did on the field recordings. The borders between reality and artificiality are thus blurred. So, is the background music pre-recorded or performed live from another space? There are multiple places in the piece where musicians are asked to perform from behind the stage or from a corridor adjacent to the hall, so that they're not seeable but only quietly hearable. For example, part 4 is performed by English horn from behind the stage. In part 7, piccolo, clarinet, oboe, and bassoon are switching between amplification for loudspeakers and live presence from the corridor. This creates a feeling of lost and uncertainty if what we hear indeed exists or if everything is an illusion of mediation. Then there is also a question if the loudspeakers of various quality are refracting the sound or if it's composed in parts of instruments. In the third part, the musicians playing is transmitted through a loudspeaker of extremely decent quality. However, the distortions are written out inside their parts. They're supposed to mimic the noise of an old radio, like this. We never know if what comes out of the loudspeakers is the loudspeakers themselves, or if it's part of the score, or if it's due to the quality of recording. I chose the form of catalog to structure the piece because it was important for me to show the potential eternity of continuation, the enumeration. Therefore, my selection of genre music, loudspeakers, and spaces is not complete or exhaustive. Each listener has the possibility to continue it further in their head. It's not a monolith or a monochrome form. Catalog allows the things to stay what they are. The cuts between parts are the decisive dramaturgical motor, whereas each part changes the parameters of field recordings, genre of background music, loudspeakers used imaginary filters on mediality. During composing the piece, I made this map, which you can see here, where each of the layers represented each parameters, and then each block was the proportion of each part of the catalog. So the first line indicated the analysis of the ambience of the room. The second part was the distortion of the loudspeakers, of the real loudspeakers, and my composed loudspeakers, so to say, the loudspeakers which I wrote inside the music. Then there was the genre references and particular patterns which I wanted to reproduce, and finally the material which I used. The scheme also contains a lot of references in between parts. So you can see, for example, the arrows indicates that some material starts much prior to its the first appearance on the field recording in part 7. Yeah, and this scheme indicates my conceptual instrumentation, which was very much limited to the qualities of loudspeakers which I wanted the music to come from. So each part had its own qualities and its own range. So for example, in part 3, you can only hear sounds in the very low register and with a certain distortion. However, there are certain underlying durational processes behind the seemingly disconnected form. Only because of such processes, the piece gains a possibility to become one of the actors. One of such principles is the narrowing of space. So the first part of the piece, in the first part of the piece, the field recording is played through the blue loudspeakers, whereas the background music through only one loudspeaker, 1A. So we can say that the music, the background music is integrated in the ambience of the room. Whereas in the last part, the ambience of the room, the field recording, is played only from 4B, whereas the background music is distributed throughout the whole space. Thus we can see the two mutual processes going on at the same time, the expansion of background music and the reduction of the ambience of field recordings.
Just to understand, 4D is a room, is a column?
No, it's all loudspeakers. It's a map of loudspeakers.
Okay, so all the things are loudspeakers.
All of the things are loudspeakers of different quality.
In one space.
It's in one space, exactly.
So no walls in between.
No
like
walls in
oboes
between.
or these
No,
sort of things.
it's all in one space, and the audience can be freely distributed everywhere. So.
The audience is in the middle of this.
Yes, they can be
like
anywhere. Yeah.
Walk around.
Walk around or sit.
Sit on the floor.
Yeah,
or
precisely.
whatever. So, but you didn't have any points of reference whether it's supposed to sit or.
No, I think it's
no chairs somewhere.
no chairs. As
As
mentioned, I imagined pillows on the floor or some kind of comfortable things where people can lie down even or sit, but not chairs. So like pillows, big pillows to sit on.
But everything covered, so that you don't have any walk-in streets.
No, not everything is covered. So
not
I would
everything
say
is
that
covered.
there are some pillows, but people can also walk. And
So you.
yes.
Is that a map type where the pillows are?
I don't have that map now because I thought that it's not the most. I would adjust it.
Just for the idea, you find the room.
Yeah, but of course the scheme is an abstract one because it also has to be adjusted to each hole separately. So of course it's just an ideal version, but it's.
Thank you.
So because this question was asked, I also have to say that all different colors, they're of different quality. For example, the red loudspeakers, they have a very cheap one computer with a reduced range, in the middle, and then the green ones are the surrounding sound system. The black ones are the home quality loudspeakers, which don't cover a lot of space with their sound. And the yellow ones are very big loudspeakers, which can be heard in any part of the hall, maybe like amps for guitar, for example. And also just to mention, as I was talking about the durational process from the beginning till the end, so in the first part I wrote a vinyl part inside of my score, so that the background music is played as if through a vinyl player, and in the last part the field recording gains the qualities of the vinyl player, because I put the instrumental parts imitating vinyl on top of the field recording in 4B. There is a sort of arc between those two parts. Another important reference is Eric Satie with his Vexations, and this principle of Vexations gave the inner structure of organization, or the inner principle for my piece. Why? Well, first of all, because Satie worked a lot with the concept of background music himself, and he showed a unique way to exhibit complete emptiness by multiple transformations of the same melody, so that in this piece there is actually nothing going on except of one melody, which is a theme, but in various inversions and transpositions. And this complete reduction of material exhibits that there is actually nothing behind it than the exhibition itself. So it's like furnishing the room, which is not necessary and completely empty. So how I worked with this in my piece, all the inner structural relationships were taken from a found material. So from one of the tapes, there is a recording of someone whistling this melody. And all the pitches in the piece are transformations of this melody, either by inversions or by retrogrades, by transposition, or by motive work. I won't analyze it everywhere in the piece, but I will just show how it works in one part. So you can see the found material on top and the 3 different iterations. They are from part 2. So just to give a second reference, this is how it looks in the score. And to go back, this is how the...
Excuse me.
Yeah.
In the iteration, there is a mistake, or you make some changes of the interval. The first iteration should be a D sharp. If we transpose everything by half tone.
I made some small changes.
Okay, so it's not a perfect.
It's not completely perfect. No, it's not. Yes. It's,
Just to,
yeah.
thank you.
So as I said, it's also with some motive work. So sometimes I had to change small things, but still the structure of the material remains. Yes. And so now, as promised in the very beginning, I will go back to my theoretical observations and will make an attempt of looking at the piece through their lenses. The piece is not only constructing a certain fictional situation, but is also debunking it by disclosing the medial conditionality of its unraveling. It's not just a sonic mockumentary, but a mockumentary which actively reveals its artificial nature. Not just a spectacularization of reality, but an accentuation of the indirections by which it is constructed. The loudspeakers, the spaces, the musicians, the witnesses, and the background musics are in constant doubt of their own ontological certainty. This piece mimics to be many things, genre music, habitual actions of other beings, resonance of a room, broken loudspeakers, it is with no doubt inexistent without becoming all of the mentioned above. At the same time, how can we claim that it follows the rules of background music if the whole structure of melodies is based on polyphonic principles of inversion and mirroring? How can we claim that private spaces are sounding like actual spaces if they're being decontextualized by supervising music, mediated by various loudspeakers, cut into fragments and ordered into catalog? The representational shell is recognizable and points to a particular context, but the structures of relations are different. The matter acts while following another logic than it does in the familiar surrounding. It is quite certain that the situation of behavioral control spreading on every social cell is hopeless. It's an exemplary sample of the victorious spectacularity, and yet the actorship of the piece itself turns the situation around. The cuts, the monstrosity of form, and the polychromic content actively resist this dictate of predetermination. The openness of form and the potentially endless raw of continuation doesn't allow to see it as something static and defined. Listeners in this piece are not just recipients, they are participants, actors, who are on a joint journey together with the loudspeakers, spaces, music, and the absent musicians. While looking at each other, while disturbing and being disturbed, they are the piece's habitat. Their faces, their reactions, and their private spaces are in the end what forms the identity of this experiment. Thank you. I'm looking forward to your questions and thoughts.